Hello everyone and welcome to another Modelling Seb video, where today it's going to be a little different since I'm breaking the format a bit. Normally we would continue the old series, but here I would like to welcome you all to a new series where today I will be covering both the build and painting of the AFV Club Churchill gun carrier, as well as, of course, reviewing the Gaahleri Mobius 0.2mm airbrush. This model is of a particular interest to me ever since I saw a strange but interesting looking camouflage scheme on Pinterest maybe 3 years ago, and I've been looking to buy this kit ever since, as it is the only depiction of this odd variant of Churchill. It's overall quite a nice kit out of the box, and it builds up surprisingly well. This was actually my first AFV Club kit, so it was very fun to get away from my stash of dragons. But this kit, of course, isn't without its issues, and the big problem with this kit specifically is the price. I was looking to find it for 3 years or so, and I saw them at shows and at model shops, but they were always going for about £70. Which is so strange because I have no idea where the justification for this is. Dragon at least gives you a nice bit of photo etch for a similar price. I just don't see how a few metal springs that theoretically make the suspension workable make the price be so high. I was looking for this kit for 2 years before I was able to buy it for a reasonable price, which was under £30 including shipping. But anyways, with this kit unpacked, let's quickly dive into the history behind this peculiar tank. The gun carrier is based on the hull of a Churchill Mark III, with a fixed superstructure being added on to house the 3-inch gun, which is also known as the 76.2mm anti-aircraft gun. These were added in order to perform better against the German armour of the time. Now you have to keep in mind that this was an order placed in 1941, which means that nearly all British tanks were still armed with 40mm 2-pounder, so this would have been a sizable upgrade. It is hard for me to find accurate performance numbers for this specific gun, as it after all was a modification of an anti-aircraft gun for this specific purpose. It is quite strange that unlike any of the other nations, the British didn't take their anti-aircraft guns and use them for anti-tank duties, with this singular example being a clear exception, which was only done as a result of the 3-inch gun being officially taken out of service to be replaced by the 3.7-inch. But maybe it is good that this YAG Churchill of sorts never went into service, as it would have been a massive strain on resources. Because the 3-inch gun that was mounted on this Churchill was specifically modified to be an anti-tank gun, meaning it fired a special shell that was only compatible with this gun on this chassis. You can kind of see how that would be a problem during a large-scale war. And in reality, by the time the Churchill gun carrier could be taken into service, it would have been in late 1942 or early 1943. And keep in mind that the Pheasant variant of the 17-pounder would be first used in February of 1943. The problems with this gun are numerous, from the old ammunition to performing only slightly better than the 6-pounder which was used at that time, and still performing worse than the 17-pounder which was being developed at the same time. It was a no-brainer as to why they were cancelled. Only 50 would be produced, with a few being converted into snake mine laying tanks, one of the less popular of the Hobart's funnies. But anyways, with a brief history lesson over and out of the way, let's get to the build. Surprisingly, building this kit is basically the same as any other. The cutting out and cleaning of some of the pieces was a bit difficult though. The wheels and parts of the suspension are made out of very thin plastic, so much so that mine actually warped, and in order to straighten them out I had to hold them down with some clove pegs to keep them in place. The suspension comes in these 2 large sponsons, with the quirk being that unlike on Tamiya kit, where the suspension springs are moulded on, here they come packaged as these little metal springs. Whilst these are definitely cool and make the suspension quote-unquote workable, they really actually aren't. If you were to want to use this kit for a diorama, the best thing to do would be to cut the springs down to your desired length. This is in order to keep the suspension lower in case you are building a diorama. This is because if you have the full length spring, it will just bounce back up and the suspension will not at all be depressed. Luckily, I am not building a diorama, so this is no issue for me. I am not lying when I say that the suspension was by far the most time-consuming part of this build. It had so many parts that it was genuinely annoying, and if I were to do a build video, they would have probably taken up half of the runtime. If it isn't obvious yet, I really do not recommend this kit for anyone who is not very skilled when it comes to models. The possibility to mess up is simply just way too high here. I am really upset that besides Tamiya, no other company makes a plastic model of the Churchill. And the Tamiya itself is only the Mark 7. So if you want anything else, you either have to get a ResiCast kit or get some sort of modification for the Tamiya. This is very weird, however, since my beloved Dragon makes the Churchill in 1/72nd. So why not upscale it to 1/35th? Because AFV Club thinks it is reasonable to give you vinyl tracks in a £60 kit when they make plastic tracks to be sold separately. So, because of my deep hatred for vinyl tracks, I decided to buy some R-model metal tracks. Now, this is my first time building R-model tracks, and I will be definitely using them again. They come pre-drilled and the wire is already cut to size, so making them is oh so easy and actually really enjoyable. Put on a show or a movie or a podcast and you'll be done in no time. But anyways, these sponsons are put together first as you need them to make the multi-part lower hull. And the guidelines for where these are supposed to be attached are questionable at best. Is it coming across that I really didn't like the build process? But with the majority of the work out of the way, the backplate and engine deck can be glued on. Neither is anything special, but I must say that the detail there is very crisp. With the lower hull basically done, and yes, that was actually all besides some minor details like tools and the exhaust. Onto the superstructure now. It is just a box. It comes together very easily, and after a quick initial cleaning, it is time to start on the texturing with some good old reliable Tamiya putty. For this model specifically, I wanted the texture to be quite minimal, as after all, rolled plate isn't as gnarly as a cast one, but it is still nice to have a bit of texture. And as always, it adds just some of that visual interest that we are always after, and when you compare it to the flat plastic, it is really a game changer. The gun is attached to the inside of the front panel, and for me and many others I've spoken to, the fit isn't that great. So much so that my gun refuses to stay put and keeps depressing. I will later just glue it on into a fixed position, but not yet. Since I am building this model to not have any fenders on, they make the tank look much more interesting with the big tracks, like on the Whippet and any other World War I era British tank. But it does mean that I need to fill in the gaps with some spare styrene sheet. Since this is a mostly out of the box build, it had meant that making this model look genuinely interesting was very hard. So I decided to scratch build the stowage bins out of copper sheet. Now, I had this entire section recorded about how I did it, but the footage has corrupted, alongside a few other parts, which is why I'm sort of speed running through this. But basically, the process was very easy. Using some copper sheet, I traced the outline of the boxes that were included in the kit. Of course, I separated into two parts, the lid and the main body of the box. If you ever made one of those paper squares with the small tabs that you fold over in order to glue them, then making this box is basically the exact same. I left about 5mm of space on the tabs and scored the bends with 2 passes of an older and blunt scalpel blade. With the tabs, it means that you can just add a little bit of super glue and easily put the boxes together. The impacts were made with just poking holes in the copper sheet, and with these attached, the last thing to do is to add more impacts. These were made with a Dremel and filled in with Tamiya putty, and just before it would set, to the point where it would no longer stick, I pushed the back of a brush handle into the putty in order to shape it. I also added one of these to the lower front plate, which means that the tracks I was going to add as applique armor needed to be drilled into as well. This followed the same procedure for the most part, with me going in and later bending some of the parts to make it fit a little better. Now with that done, this is my obligatory YouTuber moment of asking all of you to consider liking and subscribing if you have enjoyed this video so far. More than 60% of you who are watching this video are not subscribed, and since I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit that red button. Also, please consider checking out my Discord server. It is filled with a good bunch of scale modelers and we host plenty of group builds, and overall it is a very cool community. With that done, we can finally get to the interesting stuff, the painting. Priming the model is simple as always. I make sure to wash it in warm soapy water and then let it dry completely before applying the good old faithful Gunze 1500 black. This is always applied in a couple even coats to assure the finish is flat and level. The two storage bins did decide to not work with me for a moment, so I had to sand them down and re-prime them with both the metal primer and the black one. With this done, it's time to apply the base coat of the SCC-15. But of course, before we get there, I would like to thank the sponsors of this video, the Gaahleri Airbrush company, for sending me this amazing airbrush to review. I was not paid and all opinions I have are mine alone, so don't worry, this will be a completely honest review. Opening the box, you will find the instructions, which do contain quite a bit of information, such as how to properly use the airbrush in order to avoid webbing or sputtering, which is a quite nice touch. As well as this, you will of course find the 0.2mm Mobius with the cup detached, as well as a small tube of lubricant. The airbrush does use Teflon O-rings, which is a very nice touch considering that the black rubber ones will disintegrate with lacquer thinner. So if any of your other airbrushes use them, it would be good to consider switching to Teflon O-rings instead. But immediately the first issue with the airbrush comes clear to me. No spare needle or nozzle. It's not the end of the world, but it would have been nice to have one just in case. The airbrush also comes attached with a quick connect valve, which is something you really do need if you are using several airbrushes like me. To make this, I used the Mike Starmer mix, which is a 5:2:2 mix of XF61, XF62 and XF3. However, I did choose to slightly alter the mix in order to make it a bit more vibrant. This just means I used roughly 3, maybe 4 parts of XF3 yellow, which was still lightened for the post shading. The Gaahleri airbrush is really good for this sort of painting style, as it helps me to make these thin squiggles in order to create a much more interesting post shade whilst using the black base to its fullest potential. And yes, I do know that a 0.2mm is considered quite small, however I will say this. The last time I used a needle larger than 0.2 was more than 4 years ago at this point. Basically everything you see from me is painted with a 0.2mm needle. I find that it gives you just that little bit more control than a 0.3, but at the end of the day it is all preference. And of course this airbrush can be switched to a 0.3 needle if you want to. With the base coat done, you can already see that the black basing helps to lay out where the shadows are going to be later on. For the next colour, I'll be lightening it with XF57 Buff. I use buff specifically as it doesn't really tone down the colour that much, and it still helps to keep that warm and more vibrant tone. I want to keep it more vibrant as I am intending to cover this tank in mud, dust and all other sorts of grime. So a base coat that pops more is definitely going to be useful in that scenario. Many people often do forget about the importance of using these different colours in order to manipulate the final results. I do apply quite a few of these post-shade layers. In total there are 3, each one being mixed with more buff. The penultimate layer is as usual the shadow, or the airbrushed pin wash as I like to call it. This is just used in order to increase the contrast and make the model more visually appealing, as well as create the perception of depth. Of course this will be added onto with the use of actual enamel pin washes, but it still helps as of now. And the good part is that any overspray can be fixed with the lightest and final highlight colour. And with this, the main base colour of SCC-15 is complete. And it's now time to paint the Mickey Mouse scheme. This is done using SCC-14, which is made from pure XF69 NATO black. And before any of you say it, yes, there is a high likelihood that you have seen this model before, or at least the inspiration for my paint job. I first came across it on Pinterest and thought it was cool enough scheme for me to remake it. Only after I had actually finished the paint job was I told it wasn't some random modeler who made that Churchill gun carrier. It was of course none other than Uncle Nightshift. So I guess this makes me a total Nightshift copycat. I hope I can at least make it be even 1% as good as his, but no, in all honesty, if he does somehow come across this, then congratulations on your engagement. Anyways, back to your normally scheduled program. Since the camouflage is a hard edge one and it consists of many little circles of varying sizes, I decided to get myself the German ambush camouflage stencils just for this project specifically. They come as part of one larger sheet, but I decided to separate them into small individual elements for better control. And now it's time to just use these stencils in a very long and quite frankly annoying process. You either have to hold them in place or stick them on with some masking tape. Now, normally this wouldn't be that difficult, however, some of the dots go over the separated parts of the main hull and superstructure. Overall, this process isn't all that hard, but it is very tedious and I spent a good couple of hours just messing around these circles before reaching the desired result. With the first base coat of the SCC-14 done, I can now go on to post-shade. Doing this is very hard in order not to overspray, so I purposely lower the PSI in order to limit it as much as possible. The colour might stand out a little bit too much for now, but that is done on purpose, as when I apply the oil dot filter using black and dust coloured oil paints, the post shade will be heavily toned down, so consider this as extra contrast. And with that done, the last thing I put on before putting this model away and going on holiday is sealing it with a coat of VMS gloss varnish. I am a massive fan of the results of the camouflage, it is just stunning, but none of this would have been achieved without the kind folks at Gaahleri sending me this Mobius 0.2mm to use. But although this airbrush is fantastic, it isn't without its flaws. A lot of them are solely subjective, like, for example, I'm not a fan of the removable cups on airbrushes. I get the advantages, but it's never really been my style. And comparing it to my old Fender 180, look at the difference in the size of the cups. The Fender comes with a paint cup twice the size of that on the Gaahleri. This isn't a massive issue, but when I was painting the gun carrier, I needed to refill this tiny cup 3 times to simply get the base coat down. In my honest opinion, this airbrush should come with a much larger cup. And it's not like Gaahleri doesn't make them, because they are available on the website. Another one of my nitpicks with the Mobius is how the lever is located. It sits at a 90-degree angle so that as soon as you begin to pull, it starts to spray. Not like on the Fender where the lever sits at a slightly smaller angle leaning towards the front and giving just that little extra bit of leeway. But of course, it's just a matter of getting used to it. Now, my biggest problem isn't actually with the airbrush itself, but more so to do with Gaahleri as the company. My old Fender is a fantastic airbrush for what it costs, and it did cost very little, only about £20. Compare that to the Gaahleri, that is 80, 4 times the price. Of course, the Gaahleri is far better in basically every regard. It sprays better, it's more accurate, hell it even just feels better in the hand. The problem is that the Mobius 0.2 and 0.3 are the only ones able to use those needle sizes from their entire range. The smallest needle that is capable with any non-Mobius airbrush from Gaahleri is 0.35, which in my opinion is excessive when you want to be painting models and doing something like post shading. As a result, you're simply forced to buy this airbrush specifically in order to get the results you desire. But the truth is that if this airbrush was made by any other company, it would easily cost £30 or maybe even £40 more. It is definitely a good deal, but I just wish that Gaahleri would create a more budget-friendly airbrush. One that is capable of taking a 0.2 or 0.3mm needle and would cost around £40, something similar to the GAD 39 but with smaller needles. But either way, this airbrush is fantastic and I absolutely love it. I've been using it for a couple months now, and I must say, I don't think I'll be going back at all to the old Fender. It's a high-end premium airbrush for a mid-range price. If you are looking for a replacement to your airbrush, I would definitely consider this. If you are interested in buying one, or in fact any Gaahleri product, there is a link in the description which will give you a 10% discount on all Gaahleri products. If you buy anything with the link in the description, it does help the channel out and I would be very grateful. Now with this all done, I think it's about time to end this video. I hope none of you minded the change to the series. The Panzer IV is still being worked on, and after some unfortunate damage during transportation from Model Show, I've had to put in some extra time into repairing that project. I hope to come back to posting more often, however I am off to university in a couple of weeks, so the upload schedule might be, well, the same as usual, so completely unpredictable. But do you guys not mind this switching content to a new project, or would you prefer for me to stick to just one project at a time and have it be from start to finish? Please leave any thoughts in the comment section down below and I'll be more than keen to read them. Now with that all out of the way, I would like to again thank you all for watching, and if you have gone this far and are not subscribed, what are you doing? You clearly like this content, so consider clicking that button. But on a real one, I do appreciate all of you who watched this video, no matter how far you got into it, and especially if you got this far into it. And as always, good luck and happy modeling.